After the conclusion of the German Synod, the consequences were not long in coming. The president and the vice president of the German episcopate immediately made public statements, saying that they will implement in their respective dioceses the blessing of couples who are not married in the church, not only homosexual couples, but also divorced and civilly remarried couples, or simply those who live together. A journalist asked Monsignor Batzin, the president of the episcopate, if he was aware that this implied disobeying an explicit order from the Vatican, and Monsignor Batzin, who of course knew what the journalist was talking about, did not want to answer the question and simply said, quote, "In my diocese, we are going to do it." End quote. Outside Germany, it has been in French, where the first reaction in favor of what has been approval in German Synod has taken place. A group of German bishops are going to ask the Vatican to modify it, to study again, to change the doctrine on homosexual acts, so that these homosexual acts, at least in certain circumstances, on certain occasions, which remain to be determined, would cease to be a sin and could become something licit. On the other hand, in a country like Belgium, they have been blessing homosexual couples for a year now, and absolutely nothing has happened. That is to say, without any warning from the Vatican. But what has caught my attention this week has been the enormous silence that has been produced in the Universal Church. I'm referring above all to the Episcopal College after what has happened in Germany. There have been very few bishops who have raised their voices criticizing what Germans have approved, even respectfully asking the Pope to intervene to deal with the situation, asking for prayers so that the Pope has the grace of the Holy Spirit and the strength to avoid this very serious schism in the Church. Why this silence? I can think of at least three explanations. Perhaps they are not the only ones. The first explanation is that the world episcopate as a whole agrees with what is happening in Germany. I don't think that this is the right one because I am convinced that Africans do not agree, and I am sure that many bishops in the rest of the world, not only in Africa, do not agree either. Second explanation, the episcopate as a whole considers that deep down the Pope agrees with the Germans. That is, they consider that the Pope's words against the German Synod, calling it, for example, an elitist and ideologized synod, or the letter that he addressed at the beginning of the German Synodal path saying that it should be a synod focused on evangelization, or the mandate he gave to his closest and most important collaborators, Cardinal Parolin, Ladaria, and Ouellet, rejecting and prohibition things that the German Synod has later approved, or even the explicit order that the nuncio in Germany received just a week ago, and that he himself said that he was speaking ex officio against some things that were being discussed in the Synod. Perhaps they considered that all this, that they are things of the Pope in favor of the true doctrine, which, however, does not represent the feeling, the thought of the Pope, and that they are afraid that if they say something against the German Synod, the Pope will remove them from their office, from their positions of bishops. This could be terribly, because this could mean that for them the Pope is hypocrite, who is saying one thing, and it is quite clear that he says, but in reality he feels and desires something else. If this were so, it could be far worse that they consider the Pope to be a hypocrite, could be far worse, even worse than the German Synod itself. There is a third explanation. The third explanation is that they believe that the Pope should be left without saying anything, lest saying something is a weight of pressure in him. He should be left to act when he thinks he should act, or else we should wait for the Synod of Synodality in October so that all these things can be resolved there. For whatever reason, the truth is that the Pope has been left alone. The fact that there have been no public demonstrations because what happened in Germany has been public, no public demonstrations against what has been approved. Dare and humbly ask the Pope to take measures or to account on them if they take measures, means that he has been left alone. What could have happened if many episcopates or many bishops had spoken out this week? Well, what could have happened is that the Pope could feel strengthened. He could have known that he can count on his brother's bishops, on the majority of his brother's bishops, that he can count on them, and he would have much greater strength to face this serious situation. They have left him alone. I don't know what the reasons are. I have given 3 causes. I did not know what the reasons are, but the truth is that they have left him alone. And a few others who are like me are insulted every day saying that we are enemies of the Pope and that we are even enemies of the Church. And why? Because we are against the German Synod says. And so they tell us that we are enemies of the Pope. But what do they mean when they say that? What they mean is that the Pope is a hypocrite who thinks one thing and says another, who wants one thing and teaches another. I believe that when the Pope writes the letter to the Germans, that when the Pope asks Ladaria, Parolin, Ouellet to intervene, that when the Pope says in an interview the German Synod is ideologized and elitist, or when the Pope, even through the Secretary of State, sends the nuncio to express himself at the beginning of the bishop's plenary, I believe that the Pope is censored. I believe that when the Pope teaches the doctrine of the Church and asks his collaborators to teach the doctrine of the Church, I believe that the Pope is censored. Well, it turns out that I, and a few others like me, who believe that the Pope is censored, are enemies of the Pope. They insult us and they tell us that we are enemies of the Pope because we don't believe that the Pope is hypocrite. And those who say that they are his friends are basically saying that the Pope is hypocrite. I am sure he is not, and therefore I want to support him and what he has said, what he has taught, what he has asked his collaborators to say and teach. I want to support him so that this is carried out. I do not want to leave him alone in this battle. It is an extraordinary difficult moment for the Church, and we have to express our support to what the Pope teaches, to what the Pope has taught, to what the Church has been teaching for 2,000 years. We have to express our support openly, publicly. Otherwise, we will be leaving him alone. I insist, in a very difficult moment, as perhaps the Church has not experienced in all her existence. Until next week, God willing.